The year is 1514. In the dusty public square of Temesvar, Hungary, a crowd has gathered. They are silent, not with the jeering anticipation of a common execution, but with a kind of paralyzed, morbid dread. The air is thick with the smell of burning charcoal and something else, something sickeningly sweet, the smell of cooking meat. At the center of the square, an object has been prepared that defies reason. It is a throne, forged from solid iron, and it is glowing a dull, hellish red. Soldiers drag a man forward. His body is broken from torture, but his eyes still hold a spark of defiance. This is György Dózsa, a soldier, a crusader, a man who just weeks before was hailed as a savior by 100,000 peasants. Now he is to be crowned, but his coronation will not be one of glory. It will be a ceremony of unimaginable suffering, a political spectacle so cruel, so meticulously designed, that it would be whispered in horror across Europe for centuries to come. This is the true horrifying story of the man who was crowned in agony. To understand how a man could face such a fate, we must first understand the world that created him. Early 16th century Hungary was a kingdom living on a knife's edge. To the south, the shadow of the Ottoman Empire loomed, a relentless force threatening to swallow all of Christian Europe. To the west, the great powers of the Holy Roman Empire vied for influence, but the greatest threat was within. Hungarian society was brutally divided. A sliver of fabulously wealthy nobles and bishops ruled over a vast population of serfs, peasants who were bound to the land, living in conditions of near slavery. They were property, their lives dictated by the whims of their lords. For decades, their resentment simmered beneath the surface, waiting for a spark to ignite it. That spark came from the most unlikely of places, Rome. In 1514, Pope Leo X authorized a crusade against the Ottoman Turks. The Hungarian Archbishop, Tamas Bakocs, was tasked with raising the army. He offered freedom and salvation to any serf who would take up the cross and fight for Christendom. The response was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of peasants, farmers, and parish priests flocked to join the cause. They saw it not just as a holy war, but as their only escape from a life of bondage. Their chosen military leader was a man of proven courage, a soldier of fortune from Transylvania, respected for his valor in the wars against the Ottomans. His name was György Dózsa. Dózsa was no mere peasant. He was a seasoned warrior, a professional soldier who understood leadership and strategy. He quickly organized the growing mass of volunteers into a disciplined fighting force. But as the peasant army swelled, the Hungarian nobles grew terrified. They had not intended to arm their own serfs. They saw this crusade not as a defense of the kingdom, but as a threat to their own power. They feared that once the peasants had weapons in their hands, they would not turn them on the Turks, but on their own masters. The nobles forbade any more peasants from joining the crusade. They ordered those who had already enlisted to return to their fields, to their lives of servitude. But it was too late. The promise of freedom, once offered, could not be taken back. The crusade was cancelled, but the army remained, and its anger, once aimed at a foreign enemy, now found a new target. Standing before the sea of desperate men, György Dózsa made a fateful choice. He would not abandon them. If they could not have freedom by fighting the Turks, they would take it by fighting their lords. The Holy Crusade had become a peasant revolution. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Led by Dózsa, the peasant army marched across Hungary. They burned castles and manor houses. They captured cities. They declared the abolition of serfdom and the end of the nobility's power. For a brief, glorious summer, it seemed that the old world was about to be washed away in a tide of peasant fury. Their methods were often brutal. Nobles who were captured were sometimes impaled or crucified, a bitter inversion of the very symbols of the crusade they had been denied. The Hungarian nobility, shaken from their complacency, responded with even greater savagery. They hired armies of foreign mercenaries and united under the command of a ruthless Transylvanian voivode, John Zapolia. The war became a slaughter. Peasants were hunted down, their villages burned, and captured rebels were executed without mercy. Finally, outside the city of Temesvar, Dózsa's exhausted and outnumbered army was cornered. After a bloody battle, the rebellion was crushed. György Dózsa was captured. The war was over. But for Dózsa and his followers, the true horror was just beginning. The victorious nobles did not want simple justice. They wanted a statement, a punishment so terrifying it would extinguish any thought of rebellion for 100 years. György Dózsa's execution was not to be a swift end. It was to be a performance, a sermon written in fire and flesh. On that fateful day in the city square, the preparations were made with theatrical precision. The Iron Throne was brought to a white-hot temperature. In the massive forge, a matching iron crown, shaped like the one worn by the King of Hungary, was also heated until it glowed, and finally, a scepter of iron was pulled from the flames. Dózsa was dragged forward. His captors offered him one final chance to beg for his life. He refused. He was stripped naked and with long iron tongs lifted and forced onto the burning throne. Witnesses wrote that the smell of his cooking flesh was overwhelming, that the sound from his throat was not a human scream, but a deep guttural roar of pure agony while he was held there, still conscious. The nobles performed their mock coronation. The glowing iron crown was lowered onto his head. His hair and scalp instantly burst into flames. The searing metal burned through his skull. Then they took the red-hot scepter and forced it into his hand, the iron burning through his palm, welding itself to his bones. They had crowned him king of the peasants, a king of suffering, a monarch of pain. But even this was not the end. The nobility's capacity for cruelty had one final depraved act in store. Dózsa's lieutenants, who had been captured with him, were brought forward. They had been deliberately starved for days before the eyes of the crowd, as their leader was still being roasted alive. These men were given a final, horrific command. They were compelled to eat the flesh of their dying king. Those who refused were immediately cut down. Those who obeyed, driven mad by starvation and terror, were promised their lives. It was a lie. After being forced to commit this final act of degradation, they too were mercilessly executed. György Dózsa, in his final moments, was forced to watch his most loyal followers feast upon his own burning body. Finally, as he clung to the last threads of life, his ordeal was ended. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the Hungarian nobility enacted a series of brutal laws. The peasants were stripped of all rights, including the right to move freely. Serfdom was written into the law books more harshly than ever before. Dózsa's rebellion, which had begun as a fight for freedom, had resulted in the permanent legal enslavement of his people for centuries to come. The nobles believed they had erased him. They thought their grotesque spectacle of cruelty would serve as the ultimate deterrent. They were wrong. In their attempt to destroy the man, they created a martyr. György Dózsa's name was never forgotten. He became a folk hero, a symbol of the eternal struggle for justice against oppression. His story was told in secret, passed down from generation to generation of peasants. The Iron Throne has long since turned to rust. The square in Temesvar now bears another name, but the memory of that day, the story of a man forced to wear a crown of fire, endures. It serves as a chilling reminder that the most elaborate forms of cruelty are often born from fear, the fear of the powerful, that one day the powerless will rise, and that the thirst for vengeance can create a horror far greater than any rebellion it seeks to crush.